This is a picture of me at a pivotal point in my amateur athletic career. Now, it's a picture of me as a soccer player, but I didn't start off playing soccer. I started off playing Little League baseball. And around a certain age, you have cuts in Little League baseball. And at that age, it turned out I didn't make the cut. I had to stay at minor leagues while all the rest of my friends moved up to major leagues. And the rumor I heard at the time was that it came down to me and another kid for the final spot on the major league team. And the reason that he made it in front of me wasn't that he was a better baseball player. It was that he had sold more raffle tickets the year prior than me. And of course, everybody wants the kid that sells the most raffle tickets to be on their team, because what's that mean? Pizza parties, bowling parties, all of those types of things. And so I didn't make the cut. Well, message was out. I wasn't that great at baseball, and I moved on to soccer. And turns out I wasn't that great at soccer either. But wouldn't you know it, when it came time for the team's annual fundraiser that year, who sold the most value checks in all of Michiana Soccer Association history? That's right. I won like life-size arcade games and all kinds of things you wouldn't imagine. So now I didn't play soccer or sell value checks much longer, but I soon moved on to another venture. This is a casino die. It's got a hole drilled through it to indicate it's no longer valid for casino play. When my grandparents retired, they moved to Las Vegas. And on a trip back home, they gave me a bag full of these. Peculiar gift for an elementary school student. But my grandfather was a crafty guy, and I'm assuming he thought I would make them into crafts or use them as building blocks. Well, being the entrepreneur that I knew that I was, I turned them into keychains. And I sold them to my classmates for 50 cents each. Made enough money to buy my first 2 CDs, Please Hammer, Don't Hurt 'Em, MC Hammer, and Michael Jackson's Black or White. Now, that venture didn't last too long because my principal didn't appreciate me selling gambling paraphernalia to my elementary school classmates. But I used these 2 examples, baseball failure to successful salesman to principal's office delinquent, to kind of illustrate one of my favorite examples of the definition of failure. This whole idea that failure is just a journey. The idea that failure consists, or success consists, of moving from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. Now, I wish I could tell you who wrote that quote. History has failed to properly credit it. It's often said Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln, I'm not sure, but both guys that have seen their fair share of successes and failures. But interestingly enough, our venerable ancestors understood this definition of failure as well. You see, the root word for failure in Latin is fallo, and that translates roughly in one way to stumble, to trip, to fall. And so it was thought of in early times that failure, fallo, was just a trip. It was a stumble. And what happens when you trip or stumble? You get back up and move on, of course. And further looking into the etymology of the world, a little bit more in modern times, it's interesting to look at how the use of the word failure increased over time. In more modern times, in the 1800s, of course, and as we were developing a lot of inventions, the great inventors, came online, electricity and steam engines and things like that, failure was a part of that history. It wasn't until about the 1920s in modern times that we saw the use of the word start to level out. And I can only imagine that was because of the Roaring '20s, and nothing went wrong then, right? But then, of course, we saw the Great Depression, and then through the wars, and the use of the word failure continued to rise, and peaking right about the 1980s. I wonder why it peaked then. That was maybe the time when we started talking about everybody wins. Everybody gets a trophy. Failure became a little bit taboo. And we actually started to see it decrease. We stopped talking about failures. Even in the age of social media, Facebook and Instagram, we post the best versions of ourselves. We don't necessarily post our failures and talk about it. Now, the only exception is in the very, very more recent history. We've seen it peak just a little bit more, start to go back up. And I think that could be for one of 2 reasons. One, we saw another depression, or perhaps the invention of a new word, the epic fail. Now we laugh, but epic failure is certainly just one type of failure. There's all kinds of failures, right? There's catastrophic failures, mechanical failures, failures that are your fault, failures that are somebody else's fault, and failures that are nobody's fault. And that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit today. Inevitably in our lives, we will all encounter periods of failure or times that feel like failure. And I'd like to provide some points, some tips of ways that you could perhaps do that by illustrating some examples from my life, and even some examples from my day job. I promised to work in my favorite subject, the city of South Bend, and our progress today. So the first tidbit I'd offer is don't take it personally. The anecdote I'd like to share here is about a story when I was backing out of my parents' driveway. I got out of it to go close the gates. The dog didn't get out, and my car slipped into gear, went down the driveway, through the garage door. It looked a little something like this. Now, that's not my car, but so other people have experienced this, apparently. But nonetheless, the example that I use here is don't take it personally. Sometimes failure just happens, and there's nothing you can do about it, but get out of the car, dust off, call your dad, and clean up the garage. Don't take it personally. The next one, speaking of my dad, focus on what matters most. We grew up in poverty. We lived well below the poverty line, but I didn't know it. My brothers and I, certainly beyond things like the free lunches and no cable and some of those things, maybe buying groceries with food stamps. I didn't know it at the time. It's because my family focused on what matters most. You see, when my dad lost his job, he didn't think about it as failure. He didn't blame his boss or the company that had shut down or otherwise. He chose to focus on us and our family. Family traditions, going to church every Sunday, backyard camping, making ice cream out of snow from the yard, and my mom's super famous Super Bowl halftime cake in the shape of a helmet. See, we didn't know. If you choose to focus on what matters most, failures become less and less important. Persistency is the next one I like to talk about. Growing up here in South Bend, I had always dreamed to go to the University of Notre Dame for college. And about that time in high school, when you go to meet with admissions counselors and start looking at different schools, I remember being in an office up here at Notre Dame and talking to a counselor. And I vividly remember the moment when I left the office shortly after the gentleman said to me, you know, Notre Dame's not just for everyone. That was crushing. But yet, I finished strong. I filled out the application. I finished towards the top of my class in high school, and I got the letter in the mail, and I was waitlisted. Oh, another crushing moment. But a few months go by, and I wish I could tell you I got that letter that said I got in, but I didn't. I didn't get off the wait list. But I was determined to go to Notre Dame, so I took the Holy Cross route. Some people say the Rudy route. I don't choose to think of it that way. And it turns out I got a scholarship to go to Holy Cross. Made some great friends there, learned some great things, and was able to transfer over to the university my junior year and finish up here at Notre Dame. Persistency paid off because I also won a scholarship to come back to the university. I don't know how my family could have otherwise afforded it. We already established I wasn't coming for an athletic scholarship. So persistency pays off when you're in those moments. Ask for help. That's another one I might offer. After our graduation, I wanted to continue to run my audiovisual production company. That entrepreneurial spirit was still in me. I started it in high school, ran it through undergrad, and said, I'm going to make this a full-time venture. But what do I need? I need some capital. So I got to work on writing my business plan, and I visited with, I kid you not, no exaggeration, over 20 banks. And each bank I visited told me no. They had varying degrees of no. Some were very encouraging, and some were a little, good luck, kid. But that type of thing. But it was it was coming to the point where I didn't think perhaps I would ever turn this into a full-time venture. And I was talking to my roommate on the phone one night, my former roommate. He was living out on the West Coast working for an investment banker. And he asked me how things are going. And like most people, when people say, how's it going, you usually say, not bad. Things are going well, right? That's how you answer. I decided not at that moment to ask for help and to be brutally honest and say, you know what, things aren't going so well. And I told him about the 20 banks and so on and so forth, and we hung up the phone. The conversation ended kind of just organically, and within a few hours later, though, he called me back and said his boss wanted to invest in me in what he called a character loan. He wanted to give me the startup capital to do that. Character loan, I think, means you don't have a strong business plan and you don't have any capital, but we believe in you. And so I started APT Productions and ran that for a few years and really enjoyed the experience, paid back the loan and whatnot. So, but then I went on to work here at the University of Notre Dame. Those relationships I made in the production company got me back here at the university, going to school. I was running Legends across the way. So I came to a point in time when I realized I've been running businesses, but I'd never really studied the pragmatics of business. So I wanted to go to Mendoza and get my MBA. I had pursued the executive MBA, and I got in. Unlike the first time. I got in the first time. I was ecstatic, but then I found out at the time there was no scholarship money or really even loans available for that program. And I was a little disappointed. I wasn't going to be able to afford that. So I started researching other options that just didn't seem as attractive to me, the online MBAs and things like that. Sought the help of the mentorship of a former business school professor, the late David Hayes. And he said, you know what, just be patient. If that's what you really want to do, be patient. Keep pouring into what you're currently doing. And when you're ready, when the timing's right, you'll be even more prepared. And wouldn't you know it, a year later, the university, I was humbled to win a full-ride scholarship to go to the executive MBA program. And so just fortunate what happens when you're persistent and patient. Are there moments in your lives that could use a little bit of that? Learn and adapt. The other one that I think comes to mind when I think of this story is the South Bend River Lights. Maybe some of you are familiar with them. We had this concept when I started working for the community that we wanted to light the river and install some ornamental lights all across the river. And it was about a $300,000 project, and I was meeting with grant makers and philanthropists, and nobody was catching the vision. It just wasn't catching on. I was beginning to think, this thing's never going to go. We're never going to get the river lights installed. But then we came up with a new plan. We said, maybe we're thinking too small. We have to adapt to what we're hearing from these grant makers and community philanthropists. And perhaps we've got to tie it into something bigger than ourselves. Rather than just ornamental lights, what if it had a reason? Let's tie it to a sesquicentennial, our 150th year anniversary, and make it a year-long birthday party and give it a reason. This will be the gift to the community that they remember generations to come. And it'll be something that can unite people in an area that has somewhat divided us and we've forgotten about. And wouldn't you know it, we were able to install a project that went from $300,000 we couldn't fund to a $1.2 million project, and now we have the South Bend River Lights, underlaid as a treasure for the community to enjoy in perpetuity. And these are interactive. It wasn't just some ornamental lights. We hired a world-renowned lighting designer, Rob Shakespeare, and you can throw colors of light across the river. And so when you do this, you can throw a blue, and it can go blue, blue, blue all the way across the river. And if you're over here, you can catch it, and you can throw pinks back. And we can govern the colors. So during 4th of July, it's red, white, and blue, and St. Patrick's Day, green and orange. And when Notre Dame wins, it's blue and gold. And when Notre Dame loses, we just shut it all off. But we learned and adapt, and that's what we did. We've applied that to our most recent project we're working on here in the city. When Mayor Pete Buttigieg asked me to add parks to my portfolio of responsibilities, I knew what I was up against. We had about $30 million worth of deferred maintenance throughout our park system, and it very little investment, significant investment over the previous 50 years. And so I took what we learned from the river lights and said, this vision maybe isn't big enough. And maybe we've got to tie it to things that are outside of just playgrounds and swing sets and deferred maintenance. We've got to tie it to things like social equity and public safety and economic development. So soon the project moved on. It's a $50 million project and was funded citywide with unanimous support from the Common Council and the public. Thinking big, persistent, learning and adapting. Learning and adapting is something we've been pretty good at here in the city of South Bend recently. That's kind of become our forte. A shuttered school, a closed-down mill factory, and a former hotel are now some of the most desirable places to live in downtown South Bend. The home of the failed Studebaker Manufacturing Company, that campus has been raised, and it's now a state-certified high-tech park. The old train station is now a data hotel, an industry that didn't even exist when the last train rolled through. And the former hydroelectric raceway became this hemisphere's first interurban whitewater course where you can kayak right down the middle of downtown. See, we've gotten good at that around here. But sometimes you've seen this before, and this has been talked about many a times. You have to leave your comfort zone to get to that spot where the magic happens. But what people sometimes, that sounds great, but what you fail to realize is to do that, you have to be open to accepting the failure that might be in the way. And you have to learn from those things. The interesting thing is I had a really interesting experience with the potential for failure and leaving my comfort zone just rather recently. We had this idea in our park system to make it more relevant, like museums and libraries and parks are struggling with this kind of conversation of relevance. And we wanted to tackle social equity in a unique way as well. And so we had this concept to introduce this new mobile experiential recreation vehicle throughout the community. And what does that mean? And I was at a council meeting trying to say this is really neat idea, no one's ever done it before. And the only way I could get something in their mind, what's a mobile experience vehicle, was to talk about this, the Oscar Mayer Wiener Mobile. And so here I am in a public meeting, city council like this, and talking to him about the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. It was a risk. I still don't know if the idea is going to be a success or a failure. Come back and visit us next fall, and I'll tell you if this works. But you have to be willing to leave your comfort zone. And that's the last one I'll share with you in terms of the stretch of these things. And you might be thinking, you know, it's easy to talk about this, Aaron. These things really don't seem like failures. They turn into success. And you're right. But at the time, those things don't feel that way. And, you know, we like to talk about those things in business school and on social media. That's why we talk about, you know, J.K. Rowling and how she was poor and a single mother and turned down by 12 authors before Harry Potter finally got published. Or Jay-Z, who couldn't sell a CD to save his life, let alone land a record deal. So he sold CDs out of the back of his car until he finally got noticed. Or Walt Disney, who was told he lacked imagination and creativity. Or even Oprah, who was told she wasn't fit for TV. Or even the most successful businessman of modern times, arguably Bill Gates, had his first company fail. So it's fun to talk about the failure to success stories, but it's hard to recognize when you're in the moment of them. And it's okay. Invariably, some of us here are struggling with things that might feel like failure. They might be relationship-based. It might be something to do with your career, a goal. It might be personal. It might even feel like you failed yourself. And it's okay to feel sad or angry or depressed in the middle of those moments. But I would argue that to not embrace those moments, to not learn from those failures, to learn and adapt, to grow, to evolve from them, that would be the true failure. Thank you.